Like what you see here? Then be sure to subscribe to Jaguar 8 for the history of college football and Jaguar 7 for the history of Major League Baseball. And now, on with our feature presentation. For quite a few assistant coaches, the Super Bowl is the last game that they will ever coach with their respective team. It's a bittersweet and somewhat bizarre moment. On one hand, you've made it this far, and you want to celebrate all that you've accomplished, and reminisce about the incredible season that you've had. However, on the other hand, you've got to move on immediately, forget like any of that ever happened, and rebuild a franchise that is probably terrible, seeing as they need a head coach. You win or play in the Super Bowl on Sunday, and you're being introduced as the head coach of a brand new team not even 24 hours later. We saw this with Kyle Shanahan, who went from the offensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons at Super Bowl 51 to the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers immediately after. We saw this with Zach Taylor, who went from an assistant coach with the Los Angeles Rams at Super Bowl 53 to the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals immediately after. We saw this with Dan Quinn, who went from the defensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks at Super Bowl 49 to the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons immediately after. Bottom line, there are plenty of examples of this happening throughout NFL history after the Super Bowl. But usually, with most of these announcements, everyone knows it's coming, and no one tries to deny it. It's the worst kept secret in the world. The coordinator that's taking the job won't deny it. The players won't deny it, and the head coach in charge won't deny it. It's a formality, and it's just a matter of when that coach is eligible to accept the position. Which is what makes this story all the more crazy. Because the man in charge of this defense right here that you've been watching is Bill Arnsparger. After Super Bowl VIII, it was the worst kept secret in the world that he was going to be leaving the Dolphins to accept the head coaching position of the New York Giants. And literally everyone, from teammates to colleagues, confirmed the news. Everyone, that is, except for Bill Arnsparger himself, leading to one of the most awkward and bizarre celebrations in post-game press conferences in the history of the Super Bowl. Because this is the story behind what might just be the strangest post-game in the history of the big game. Before I talk about what transpired after the game, we need some context to understand why Arnsparger was even being considered as the head coach of the Giants in the first place, both in terms of the Giants being bad and Arnsparger's unit being good. In 1973, there were quite a few good teams in the NFL. The New York Giants were not one of them. In fact, they were the worst team in the NFC, and one of the worst in all of football. In 1973, the Giants went 2-11-1, and after a promising start to the season, where they won their opening game against the Houston Oilers and then tied the Philadelphia Eagles, everything fell apart, as they lost 11 of their final 12 games. As a side note, to learn more about the 1973 Giants and just how much of a chaotic mess they were, click the card in the upper right corner. It was an abysmal season for the Giants, who finished the year with a point differential of -136, had an offense and a defense that was ranked outside the top 20 in the 2016 league, and had a defense that was porous, having given up at least 40 points in 3 games, being one of just 2 teams, alongside the New Orleans Saints, to do this. Alex Webster was already on somewhat thin ice after his first 4 seasons in New York, where the Giants failed to make the playoffs. But after this season, which was quite easily the worst of his tenure, and was just the 3rd time since the NFL-AAFC merger in 1950 that the Giants finished a season with 2 or fewer wins, Webster was fired as the head coach of the team. The Giants' legend as a player did not have similar success running the show, and now the Giants needed to find a successor, and they knew just where to turn to. Because if you need to poach an assistant coach, poaching one from the best team in football is a good place to start. And there were few assistants better at the time than Bill Arnsparger. Arnsparger had been with Don Shula on his staff for a decade, being the defensive line coach on the Baltimore Colts from 1964 to 69, and the defensive coordinator on the Miami Dolphins from 1970 to 73. Where Shula went, Arnsparger went. And under his guidance, as you're able to tell, the Dolphins had a dominant defense. Sure, their offense over the first half of the 1970s when they were the best team in football on a yearly basis, was great, don't get me wrong, but it was their defense that was truly dominant. In 1969, the year before Arnsparger took control of the defense, Miami had the 4th worst defense in the AFL and the 9th worst defense in pro football across both leagues. In 1970, the defense was 5th. That jumped up to 3rd place in 1971 by allowing just 12.4 points per game, 1st place in 1972 by allowing just 12.2 points per game, as they had an undefeated season, and one of the best defensive showings in NFL history in 1973, when they allowed just 10.7 points per game, once again finishing 1st in the league in that category. Imagine allowing 12.4 points per game, and then getting better, and then getting better again. That's what Miami's defense was doing, and it wasn't even with any real star players. They had 0 first-team All-Pros defensively in 1971, and 2 in 1972 and 1973. They were called the no-name defense for a reason. Arnsparger was just a defensive mastermind who many consider to be the godfather of the zone blitz. Seriously, football as we know it is not the same without him. Over the course of that 1973 season, Miami's defense was nothing short of dominant, and that's putting it lightly. In half of their games, they allowed fewer than double-digit points. Including the playoffs, in 17 games, only twice did a team score 17 or more points on them. Keep in mind, the league average was 19.4 points per game in 1973. Only twice did a team score 2 points below the league average. They had one stretch in the middle of the season where they recorded back-to-back shutouts, and had a 3-game stretch in October where they had 3 straight games without allowing a touchdown. And in a Monday Night Football game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, even though they allowed 26 points, they forced 6 turnovers in the process, and scored 2 pick sixes. So even in their bad games, they were good. As a side note, to learn more about that game against the Steelers, click the card in the upper right corner. Because of Arnsparger's success, he was getting interest around the league, and in particular, with the New York Giants. While he wouldn't be allowed to leave the Dolphins until after their season ended, he could still take offers and interviews and whatnot, and Shula had no problem with it. Everyone knew that Arnsparger's time was coming. As Shula said, a couple of clubs were interested in Bill, and I gave clubs permission to talk to him, because I felt he could handle the situation, because it would not affect him in preparation for the Super Bowl. Heck, one reporter even so much as congratulated Arnsparger on getting the Giants gig before the Super Bowl was even played, saying that they would see him in New York. It was pretty much a done deal. Arnsparger's last game with the Dolphins was going to be Super Bowl VIII. After this game against the Minnesota Vikings, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, for the first time ever, Arnsparger was going to be in charge of an NFL team. And man, what a final game it was. When all was said and done, the Miami Dolphins dominated, taking it by a final score of 24-7, winning their 2nd straight Super Bowl and establishing themselves as a mini dynasty of sorts. And defensively, this game was another masterclass from Arnsparger, as had been the case throughout the season. Minnesota was a very good running team. They finished 6th in the NFL in rushing yards, and inside the top 10 in rushing touchdowns and yards per carry. Against the Dolphins, absolutely nothing. They got 72 rushing yards on 3 yards per carry, and that was it. If we take out the runs by Fran Tarkenton, so we're only counting the design runs and handoffs, the Vikings had 20 carries for 55 yards, or 2.7 yards per carry. The top player on the Vikings, Oscar Reed, had 32 rushing yards throughout the game. Not once did the Vikings have a run go for 10 or more yards. It wasn't until the 4th quarter, when it was a 4-possession game and was out of reach, when the Vikings finally found the end zone and got on the scoreboard. It wasn't until there were 3 minutes left in the first half when the Vikings finally entered Miami territory, as over the first 25 minutes of the game, they picked up 1 first down. Long story short, Shula wasn't kidding when he said that Arnsparger could prepare for the game and interview, because the Dolphins were incredible on defense in this one, just as they had been all season. But it was after the game where things got, shall we say, weird. because everyone let the cat out of the bag with the worst kept secret in football. But after this win, Arnsparger was heading to New York to become the head coach of the Giants. One high-ranking official for the Dolphins said in the locker room on Arnsparger becoming the Giants head coach, "Arnsparger has the job. You can bet on that." Don Shula said on his longtime colleague, "We gave 2 game balls today. One was to Larry Zonka, who won MVP. The other was to Bill Arnsparger, who is supposed to be getting the Giant job as head coach. That ends the rumor. All I can say is, the Giants are getting themselves one hell of a coach." And linebacker Von Matheson echoed those thoughts, saying on his defensive coordinator, "Arnsparger has been a great defensive coach. That's why he's going to be the head coach of the New York Giants. It's going to be tough to find another man who can do all the things he did." So that should be the end of it, right? A fairy tale ending in Miami for one of the greatest defensive coordinators of all time. The cat's out of the bag, and everyone knows it. Players know it, coaches know it, the media knows it. Quite literally, everyone with a pulse knows it. However, for some reason that I have no idea why, Bill Arnsparger spent his entire time talking to the media after the game, denying the rumors that he was now going to be the head coach of the New York Giants. Literally everyone confirmed it except for Arnsparger, because according to Arnsparger, his players and Don Shula were lying. As Arnsparger said, "It is not definite. It is something I am considering." Wait a second, time out. What the heck are you talking about? What do you mean it's not true? Literally everyone close to you is saying that it's a done deal. The press conference is scheduled for Wednesday. It'd be one thing if you said, "Today, I just want to celebrate all we've accomplished." Or, "It's not about me today. It's about the great work this team has done and about the players." Or, "I'll talk about everything tomorrow. But right now, I want the spotlight to be on the game and this team." If you said that, fine. This is a non-story then. But to say this, Don Shula said you're taking the job. Joe Robbie, the owner of the team, said you're taking the job. A Dolphins official said you're taking the job. Players said you're taking the job. And here you are, trying to deny it? Seriously, what the heck kind of postgame is this? This is like when a 5-year-old gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar and tries to deny that it was him, even though it was on camera, multiple eyewitnesses in the household saw it happen, and the 5-year-old has cookie crumbs all over his face. Seriously, what the heck are you trying to hide? Especially since you literally took the job immediately after. This was the team, and everyone associated with the team saying, "We're really going to miss you. And this one was for you and for everything you've done here." And you saying, "What are you talking about? I'm not leaving." Like, come on, just come on. Then again, maybe Arnsparger just absolutely stunk at talking to the press, seeing as in his introductory press conference with the Giants, he said that he knew absolutely nothing about the Giants and hadn't evaluated any of their players yet. And even if he wanted to, he couldn't, because they played their games in the snow. Yeah, I got nothing for that one. Regardless, I'm not sure we're going to see too many post-games after the Super Bowl more awkward and bizarre than this one. Sure, there have been some tense ones, like everything that happened with the Raiders after they won Super Bowl XV and their status in Oakland was up in the air, and what happened with the Cowboys after they won Super Bowl XXVIII with regards to Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson, and the tension between the two men hitting a breaking point. But in terms of awkwardness and confusion, it was going to be tough to top what happened at Super Bowl VIII. Because even though Bill Arnsparger was absolutely brilliant at running a defense, he was absolutely terrible when it came to running his mouth. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.